Today, I'm going to share with you how I was able to unlock the film look with the iPhone 16 Pro. And I rented the Fuji X-T5 to help me out a little bit. You can use this method for achieving the film look with the iPhone 16 Pro or the Pro Max, and the iPhone 15 Pro and the Pro Max. If you don't have either of these cameras, I uploaded some raw files that you can download and play around with as you follow along. Normally, I like to try to go out and get these filmic looking type shots for client work and YouTube videos using the log profiles with my bigger sensor cameras like the Sony a7S III, which I'm filming this on right now, or the a7 III. But I wanted to be able to achieve that film look with the camera that I'll pretty much take with me everywhere. Straight out of the camera, the iPhone's footage can sometimes feel a bit too sharp and digital. To get that more organic and filmic vibe I was after, I tweaked a few settings, I adjusted my shooting style, and I used the X-T5's color science as a reference. And then I created 5 LUTs inspired by classic Fujifilm simulations. I'm not the original thinker of this idea. Arthur R told me about it, so all the credit goes to him for the Fujifilm LUT idea. Go check out his channel. I'll show you how to achieve the film look in 4 parts. We're gonna start with settings, then I'll talk to you about some shooting techniques. We'll go over lighting and exposure, and then color grading to add that extra flavor to your shots. And then if you stick around to the end, I'll talk to you about the Final Cut camera app and also using the Blackmagic camera app, which is really nice because then you can preview the LUTs in the camera as you're shooting. All right, we have quite a bit of info to pack into as shortest as possible YouTube video, and that's what we will be tackling today on the Film Alliance. So the first thing that we're gonna do is jump into our settings, and we are gonna go over to camera. We're gonna go to the top one, which is record video. And I'm gonna switch my record video to 4K 24 frames per second. 4K is the resolution and 24 is the frames per second. 4K 24 will create a subtle motion blur that mimics how our eyes perceive movement in real life, making it feel more natural and immersive. This frame rate also has a very distinct visual rhythm that evokes that classic film look. I think it's one of the most important steps in getting your phone to look like it was shot on film. So after that, we're gonna scroll on down until we get to HDR video. Make sure that one is turned off. Then we're gonna keep on going down, and I'm going to lock my camera in place. And this is in case I wanna get a zoom shot. You don't want the camera to jump between the cameras and have a jolting effect while you're zooming in. I'm gonna talk more about the cameras and which ones I like to use and how I recommend only using one of them. But if you do like to use all 3 different cameras to get wide shots and then maybe a telephoto shot, I would recommend locking off your camera so that it doesn't jump between them while you're recording in your video. And then finally, in the same setting, we're gonna head down and we're gonna lock our white balance. Locking your white balance ensures consistent colors throughout your entire video. Even if the lighting conditions change a little bit, your white balance still needs to be the same. This is a super important step to make sure that your clips match up in post-production. If your white balance is not locked in place and your white balance is fluctuating all over the place, it's gonna be very difficult to have your clips match up and have continuity and consistency between your colors when you get to post-production. And let's be honest, if you're shooting different colors and scenes and you're trying to mix and match all those clips together, it's not gonna have that much of a film look. Now we're gonna jump out of record video and go back to the main settings, and we're gonna head on down till we get to formats. The first option we see here is camera capture, high efficiency, and most compatible. I switched this over to most compatible. High efficiency is like a smart way to store your stuff on your phone. It squeezes all of your photos and videos down, takes up less space on your phone, but the shots still look pretty good. The downside is that every device or program out there can't open these files directly, and that's why I choose most compatible. That's like the old reliable way. It saves your photos and your videos in a format that pretty much any computer or phone can open up right away. The catch is that the files are gonna be a little bit bigger and they're gonna fill up your storage faster, but it's gonna be way less complicated once you go to edit your footage. Then in the same exact menu, go all the way down to the very bottom where we see Apple ProRes. Go ahead and toggle that on, and then go to ProRes encoding and switch that to log. You've heard of me talking about log up until this point, and if you don't know what that is, Apple Log is like shooting video in RAW mode. It doesn't look great right away, it looks washed out and flat, but it does preserve way more colors and light information, which will give you and I more flexibility when we get to post-production to edit our footage to make it look film-like. It's also great for getting the best image quality when we find ourselves in tricky lighting situations. You don't have to use log for your shots, but just understand if you shoot straight out of camera, you're not gonna get the type of filmic look that you've been seeing in my shots that I've been showing you up until now. And you're gonna have to rely more heavily on the shooting techniques that you use, the lighting, and the exposure. A lot of the way that I got the film look is from shooting in Apple Log and then just adding my LUTs in post-production. By the way, you don't have to use my LUTs to get that film look on your iPhone. You can use other people's LUTs out there who have created cinematic looking LUTs or film-like LUTs for your iPhones. I'm just telling you how I did it and how I was able to achieve these shots. You could also manually color grade all of your log footage. That's just going to be more time consuming and it will add to your workflow. And by the way, I do switch between log and normal color profile while I'm out shooting. I'll get more into that once we get into lighting and exposure. So let's jump out of there and get back into our main camera settings. And we're gonna go to the next one down, which is preserve settings. And the first thing that we see is camera mode at the top, and we're gonna toggle that on. This way, between our video shots, if we happen to close up our phone, put it in our pocket or something, then pull it back out again to get some more shots, we don't have to toggle to get back to the video mode. Then we're gonna continue to scroll down until we get to exposure adjustment. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this on. This way we'll always see a little exposure adjustment tab right up here, and you can easily toggle your exposure compensation left and right. We're gonna get more into this once we get into the exposure and lighting portion as well. And then finally, we're gonna go down a little bit more till we get to Apple ProRes. We're gonna turn that on. That way we don't have to continuously jump back and forth between Apple ProRes on and off when we go to close up our phone, because that's just one more step every single time you open up your video. Now let's jump back out into the main camera settings, and we're gonna scroll on down until we get to composition. Go ahead and turn your grid and your level on. Then go down a couple more until we get to the main camera. Right now it's set up as our main camera, the 24mm lens, and then we also have two other options, 28 and 35. I'm gonna go ahead and toggle those two off. When I was out in the field shooting, I realized that I only want to use one of these cameras to get that filmic look, if possible. This way, all of my shots will have consistency and continuity, not only in the way that they look as far as colors go, but also with the distortion on the outsides of the frame. If I was shooting a super wide shot and then switching it over to telephoto and then back to the 24, it might be pretty jarring to the viewer, so I try to keep it right at 24mm the entire time. Also, I noticed when I switch between the different cameras, like 28 and 35mm, they seem to have a lot more noise in the shadows than the 24mm. So I'm gonna try to stick to 24 because I want that highest image quality possible. I'll still be able to jump into the wide shot using only this camera, but I'm gonna try to stick with only one focal length during the entire sequence. Shooting techniques are important when you want to get that film look. It comes down to what you're trying to shoot. If you were just doing some B-roll for some client work or a YouTube video like this, then you're going to want to pick one of these LUTs and just stick with it the entire time. And whether it's my LUT or someone else's LUT, stick with the same LUT throughout the entire sequence. Another thing that I found is when I'm shooting in low light situations, or even when the sun is not too high in the sky, it's kind of lower in the sky, I'm getting a lot of ghost flares. A ghost flare on the iPhone 16 Pro refers to that unwanted visual artifact that can appear in your photos or videos, especially when shooting towards bright light sources. It manifests as a little light reflection bouncing around the inside of the lens elements and the camera sensor, and it can cause these reflections, which are super distracting, especially if you're hand holding the camera. You can change the camera angle by slightly repositioning yourself in the way that you're holding it, and this will eliminate or minimize the ghost flares. But another thing to keep in mind is try to keep your lenses clean, because if you have a little smudge on your lens, it's going to make these ghost flares even worse. That's why I keep one of these on me, no matter what camera I'm shooting with, just to make sure my lenses are always clean. I use the grid to frame up my shots and to make sure my composition is looking decent. But even a bigger piece of advice that I can give to you is making sure that your horizon is level. And that's why we turned on the level in the settings, because it's so important. Too many times I've gotten home and my level was off a little bit, so I had to scale in and then rotate. And when you scale in to rotate to get the level right, you're losing out on resolution. And we're already dealing with a small sensor out of the iPhone, so we want to get as much resolution as possible. So make sure your horizons are level. And finally, because we're dealing with a smaller sensor and a fixed aperture, the shutter speed is going to shoot way up, especially when we're in bright environments. It's for this reason that I say with the iPhone, don't try to move too much unless you have a gimbal. We don't always have to be moving with our cameras. And the deeper I go down this filmmaking journey, I'm realizing calm down, and let the subject do the work. Just sit there, have a good frame, a good composition, and just focus on the storyline rather than trying to move the camera too much. Another big thing, especially when it comes to the iPhone 16 Pro, is the native sound that you get out of the mics is unbelievable. A big part of creating cinematic or film look type of shot with your iPhone is getting good sound implementation into your B-roll and adding it as sound effects. This will elevate the immersive experience. So after I'm done going around getting my filmic shots, I'll jump into the iPhone sound recorder and I'll go try to get natural sound effects so that I don't have to pull it from another site. When it comes to getting that film look, I always tell my students in all the courses that I've created, the best time to shoot is when the sun is lower in the sky. Whether that's golden hour or blue hour. Not when the sun is high in the sky and you're gonna get a lot of harsh lighting. Also, don't shoot into the sun or other lighting sources that are super bright because it's gonna wash out all of your colors. The only time that I'll have the sun in the actual shot is when the sun is lower in the sky and it's not gonna blow out my colors. And that brings up how I shoot with the 16 Pro when I'm only using the native settings, not using any external apps. And that is by turning my exposure compensation to -0.7. This way the iPhone is not digitally trying to bring up those shadows and then giving me a muddy image. So I set my exposure compensation to -0.7 while I'm shooting in Apple Log, and then I'll use my finger to lock on the highlights, whatever the brightest part of the frame is, and then I just hold it there. Because we're shooting in Apple Log, I can bring up those shadows in post-production if I need to, and I much prefer to bring up the shadows than try to bring down the highlights. And this is the workflow that I use to properly implement my LUTs into that footage. Another thing that I like to do is also switch my camera over to the standard color profile or the standard camera, which is not Apple Log, and then take a reference video to see what that looks like. So when I get to post-production, if I'm seeing my colors are not matching up like I think they should in real life, I can look at how the iPhone computed those colors so that I can have a good apples to apples comparison. And now let's talk about color grading. I happen to use Final Cut Pro, but if you have Premiere Pro or DaVinci Resolve, these methods will work as well. You're gonna wanna make sure that your library is set to an SDR timeline. This way, when you go to export your Apple Log footage, which is Rec 2020, it'll export as a Rec 709 clip or a standard dynamic range clip. Some people like to use the color space override inside Final Cut Pro to get their clips to be that Rec 709 inside the timeline, but that will mess with the LUTs that I created and the way that I applied these colors. I like to do it this way because then I can actually monitor or preview my LUTs in the Blackmagic camera app rather than converting it over to Rec 709. And then when I go over to the Blackmagic camera app and I'm shooting in Apple Log, I won't be able to preview what it actually looks like. I'll talk a little bit more about that once we get into the Blackmagic camera app. So I go ahead and drag my Apple Log footage over into Final Cut Pro. And as you can see, it automatically looks good, but that's because Final Cut Pro automatically adds an Apple Log transform LUT. So we're gonna go ahead and turn that off. We're gonna turn that off by coming up to the little eye up here on the right-hand side. Then we're gonna come down to where it says basic. We're gonna click on that and we are going to go to general. That opens up more options and you can see that we are shooting in the Rec 2020 color space. We're gonna go ahead and turn that camera LUT to none. Now we're back to that Apple Log grayed out look. Then I'm gonna go over to my effects panel, go over to color, and I'm gonna drag over a custom LUT to that log shot. Once my custom LUT is in there, I'll come up here to this little film tab, and you'll see I have a custom LUT which is outlined by a yellow bar. Now it's time to import the LUT. Whether you got my LUT or you bought somebody else's LUT, you're gonna come over here, the drop down menu where it says none, and you're gonna go choose custom LUT. Now go find the LUT wherever you downloaded it to. You can click on that and then press open. Once we have the LUTs imported, now we can hit the drop down bar again and you can choose which one of the LUTs you want to drag onto your shot. As you can see right now, I have a Fuji shot with the film simulation Eterna, and right next to it, I have my Eterna LUT that I put onto this Apple Log footage, and it looks pretty close. But let's say I want to adjust it further. Maybe I don't like the color of it. Maybe my white balance was off in camera. Maybe I didn't expose something correctly. So I'm gonna go back into the effects and I'm gonna drag over color wheels onto my clip. Now I'm gonna drag the color wheels above the custom LUT and then start editing the color wheels from there. After I'm done tweaking this clip to how I want it, I'm gonna go ahead and click on the clip. I'm gonna press Command C, which is copy. And then I'll highlight all the rest of the clips in the entire timeline. And then I'm gonna press Command Shift V, which is going to paste all of my attributes to every single clip so they all match up in post. Then I would probably just go from start to finish and adjust each clip using the comparison window in order to make sure that all of my clips match up back to back. The LUT just gives us a baseline of somewhere where to start. Then the rest, we have to make our own adjustments along the way. If you were trying to do this without the LUTs, then I would say just use the comparison window, whether you're in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro, and then take a screenshot of whatever the clip is that you want to try to match up from a movie or an image that you like the look of, drag it into your timeline, and then have the comparison shot side by side, and then start using the color wheels to try to get your clip to match up to that image. And then if you don't want to use any of those steps, you can use the curves or the color wheels to try to get this clip to look like you want it. But that is starting from scratch. It's how we built the LUTs. It's going to take a little bit of time, but you will get the hang of it eventually. Now let's talk about the Final Cut camera app. In order to get your shots to look better than just using the native settings that are within the iPhone, I found that the Final Cut camera app is extremely helpful. If you'd like more exposure control than just using the exposure compensation meter, then download the Final Cut camera app. It lets you adjust settings like shutter speed, ISO, white balance, and focus, so you don't have to just rely on the autofocus within the camera itself. If you're into multicam shooting, then it's particularly useful because it can sync footage from up to 4 iPhones, I think, and then you can seamlessly edit it in Final Cut Pro. Think of it as like the bridge between your iPhone's built-in camera and the powerful editing tools that are within Final Cut Pro, which gives you the tools to capture and create cinematic videos right from your phone. There are some things that you're gonna wanna make sure you have it switched on if you want to use the same methods and the LUTs that I created for the phone. And that's going up to this little circular bar that houses all of the settings. We're gonna switch from HVC to Apple ProRes. Then we're gonna switch SDR to log. And 4K 24 is exactly how we want it to continue to shoot. We're gonna stay locked on our 24mm lens, and then you press on this little arrow at the bottom right, and that will give you access to autofocus, manual focus, along with your white balance. And of course, exposure compensation, just like we have in the native camera app. Now the Blackmagic camera app, on the other hand, is great because it will allow you to record in H.265 in the Apple log. Whereas with the Final Cut camera app, you can't shoot in H.265 while still shooting in log. H.265 is great because that's smaller file sizes. This will help with file sizes on your phone because smaller file sizes means you won't run out of space as fast. Apple log doesn't have a specific video compression standard like H.264 or H.265. Instead, it captures footage in a flat color profile designed for post-production flexibility, primarily using it for ProRes codecs for efficient and high quality compression. But ProRes will produce larger file sizes compared to H.264 and H.265. ProRes is a higher quality codec designed for professional editing. And while H.265 is more compressed, it reduces the file size for easier storage, and it still looks great in my opinion. Also, I mentioned with the Blackmagic camera app, you have the ability to preview the LUTs on the display so you can see what the actual shot looks like, and you even have the ability to burn those LUTs into your shot. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you're in a pinch, but you do have the ability to do that. That's why I highly recommend, if you want to get the most out of your camera, then download the Blackmagic camera app. While mirrorless cameras offer superior image quality and manual control, the convenience, portability, and versatility of an iPhone make it a compelling choice for everyday use and spontaneous shooting. Achieving a film look with your iPhone 16 Pro or your iPhone 15 Pro or the Pro Max is entirely possible with the right techniques and tools. Whether you're shooting with the native settings, the Final Cut Pro camera app, or the Blackmagic camera app or another app, capturing cinematic footage is within your reach. Remember to consider factors like shooting style, lighting, and the exposure to elevate your visuals. If you don't want to use my LUTs, go out and test different LUTs while you're shooting with Apple Log. This way, all of your shots will have continuity and consistency. While dedicated cameras offer advantages, the iPhone's convenience and portability make it a powerful creative tool. Embrace its potential and experiment to unlock your filmmaking capabilities. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance. Thanks for watching, and until the next one, have a good week.